is coming from somewhere or coming off another call or getting lunch at the same time. So just want to welcome everybody. Thank you for spending an hour or so with us as the ACHE of Indiana. We inaugurate something new. So we did a survey and we asked people, what were some of the most pressing issues that they wanted to hear about? And leading change was by far the biggest. So I'm really excited to talk through this. And again, very, very interactive. So we welcome your participation. We're going to record this. We're going to also send out the slides and the materials afterwards so you'll have access to it all, and hopefully it'll be helpful for you as you go forward. Just a reminder, so there's again, it's very interactive, so get a piece of paper um, and a pen or a pencil because there is going to be an exercise in here, and we're gonna go through some things. Feel free to use the chat to ask questions, provide your perspective, network. Um, Big fan of LinkedIn, and my contact information will be at the end, but feel free to uh, touch base with folks. And really, this is about enjoying our time together and learning together. So we're going to start with our first poll question, and pretty simple. What type of healthcare organization or team are you in or do you support? So we'll give it a minute or so to um, have you click on that, be able to see kind of where everybody's coming from. So are you in a direct caregiving team, a clinical support team, a logistical support team, or more of a strategic level? So give it a minute or two. That'll give anybody who hasn't had a chance to grab their piece of paper and pen or pencil some time as well. All right. All right, I think we can probably put those polls up or the results. Oh, really good mix. So it looks like we've got pretty close direct care and clinical support. Um, Logistical is about 15%, and the majority at 44% is strategic support. So this is really good. Again, one of the neat things about what we are going to talk about in this time together, really all of these tools, all of these uh, concepts can really support you both at an organizational level, but also from a personal level. And so, as we as humans and individuals go through changes in our own lives, a lot of these things can be very much applied to that. So, hopefully, you'll be able to use them as you need in your life. Um, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But for today, we're really going to focus on the healthcare organization and from a kind of a strategic level, what does change mean and how does that impact us? And like the headlines today, we see this change happening. It is all around us. It's happening more and more. It's coming at a faster and faster pace. And this quote from a book called Built to Change, I really like this book. It basically says that what we need to do as executive leaders across organizations is really focus on the change and how we can essentially be more resilient. Um, because the change is happening so quickly, um, we're not just concerned about survival. we're concerned about thriving and really growing and being um, the the organization that we need to be for our clients or customers, our employees, our vendors, right? All our community, whoever we're serving, however we're serving them, right? Really requires this focused attention. Um, because when we do that, things fall into place in a lot um, better way than if we were to kind of piecemeal focus on things. So I like this quote. I think it's important to set this stage, if you will, for what change really is. So think about a time in your life or in your organizations that change worked, right? Something actually went well with change. If you want to just think about it or put it in the chat or, you know, being able to, um, how, what went well? Why did it go well, right? So this is a question that you can think about because change ultimately is about, you know, becoming different, right? Moving from A to B. Um, it's about a transformation or an alteration potentially. Um, there's a renewal aspect, right? Becoming new, changing ourselves. And then it often involves either giving something away or gaining something, and sometimes both. What change really can be is difference, right? And being more, what we were doing today is not what we are doing tomorrow. And so this change is important to really hammer home because sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, right? Carla has a great point here of, she remembers a new product kickoff, right? Where it sounds like there was a kickoff, a training. Um, it worked because there was buy-in, goals were set. There was, sounds like maybe a plan. And ultimately, they were able to celebrate that success. And so when we think about that process, and thank you, Carla, for that, because that's a great example of change does work. Um, we have to be open to that. So we're going to talk a little bit about what that includes and how that works. So, um, but think next time you are starting to feel really frustrated or uncertain, think about the time in your life or in an organization that change actually happened and it went well. And think about what that feeling is, and think about how that worked for you. So that's a great way to kind of orient ourselves to how change can be effective. Now, we are in healthcare, and certainly, as we all know, there's a lot of changes happening. And, you know, go ahead and take a minute, put in the chat, what are the factors of change that you or your organization have experienced recently? Um, it's all around us. I mean, it's literally happening every day. So these factors, what are they? What do you think um, that is forcing or really the engine of things that are happening uh, that are really challenging us in this industry, right? There's so many of them. We can we could probably have a whole day on this. Um, but at the end of the day, the factors, whether you're in a hospital, whether in your senior care, skilled nursing facilities, or outpatient, or a service line administrator, the factors are happening, and they're going to happen continuously, whether it's today or tomorrow. Uh, something that's on the dock today is going to be off tomorrow. So again, that's why I think we need to have a really holistic approach and a more strategic approach to change. So when we think about what these forces could be, right? Let's from an internal perspective say, leadership changes, new people come in, they have different expectations, things like performance targets, financial pieces, all of these priorities could change, right? Innovation and technology is a huge one right now. Uh, so all of these are just examples of what forces are driving change for us. And so it just helps to kind of understand that there are both internal shortages or internal forces and external forces. And Amy says, staff shortages, support services like radiology and catheterization labs, um, right? That's a huge issue. Declining reimbursement. So reimbursement is an example of an external change or an external force, but it also um, becomes an internal force because it hits all of these things. Market competition. So again, this is just an example of the forces that are kind of driving these changes. Externally, we have things like population, demographics, age, geography, people are moving, the technology, the market, right? Just the consumer expectations. All of these things can be summed up into this diagram here called PESTLE. PESTLE is a very well-known organizational development tool uh, to be able to think about and categorize the different examples of change and what's driving it, so that then from a planning and a strategic direction perspective, we can, as leaders, think about and start to plan how we deal with this and what the effect of those changes are. So again, this is just an example. If you just were to Google PESTLE, PESTEL, uh, you would find a lot of good resources. So again, the P is for kind of political issues. E is for economic issues. And again, these are very, very high level issues, right? Um, what's going on with AI, right, is a great example. So that would fall under T. Um, legal issues, right? How things are happening at state capitals or in Washington. So again, this is a great start to think and categorize what it means from an external force. Now, we talked about change, and we need to remember that change is going to happen, right? Whether we are here or whether we are somewhere else, change is inevitable. It's also constant, right? It's moving, it's continuing. It's kind of like evolution is. It might be slow or it might be fast. And we have to recognize that for us as humans, uh, that change can be very difficult, right? We're very used to and have the expectation of kind of a state of normalcy. And so when that is interrupted or disrupted, it's really challenging for us. And that is again really important for leaders to understand, because that emotional charge that comes with change is really important to address. And I think that's a key piece that sometimes gets left out in the planning process, right? We do the modeling, we do the strategic planning, we do all of these things, and yet we don't talk about how this is emotionally going to impact the people that it's going to impact. So hopefully one of the takeaways from today is just remembering change is going to happen. how can we as leaders help the emotional part of that change? We know we have our own changes in our own lives. We respond positively. We see the benefits. Things are their downsides as well. At the end of the day, the question is, do we react to change or do we respond to change? Right? When we react, it's immediate, right? It's a very think of a chemical reaction, right? It's gonna happen really, really quickly. Versus the respond to change is a little bit more planned. It's, we can think through, we can be a little bit more strategic, where the reaction is more instantaneous. So we have to be careful, again, about if we know change is inevitable and change is coming, is it easier to respond to the change and kind of predict it, or is it going to be more challenging to simply just react to whatever happens in front of us, right? So how we as leaders, as individuals, deal with change is just as important as how we lead change. So as leaders, I think it's really important for us to take some time to reflect on how we as individuals react or respond to change in our own lives. And so that requires a lot of self-reflection. It requires a lot of uh, potential coaching or support, um, or just doing some very um, basic research into, who you are and what you feel um, about things. And so being able to, again, as a great takeaway, uh, from a leadership perspective, this is an opportunity to set expectations and talk about what it means to change and acknowledging that it can be very challenging. In the leadership positions that we're in, we have the opportunity to respond to change rather than react to it, um, because the reaction may have consequences. Uh, versus when we plan and we respond, we're better able to hopefully anticipate that and have make adjustments as needed. So the research tells us that there are generally three ways of dealing with the change. One is just outright resistance. The next is kind of an acquiescence, so a grin and bear it, but but do it, but not really be, your heart is not into it. And then the third one is commitment. And again, it's kind of a scale. So uh, depending on what level of change it is or how impactful it is for you personally, um, you could be at any one of these areas. And so, we just need to be aware that this is kind of um, the trajectory. Now, one thing as leaders, we sometimes think we know, right, is when we see a lack of resistance, um, that does not equal commitment. So when there's a lack of this kind of, you know, determination to push back, um, sometimes we can interpret that incorrectly as buy-in when it's in fact actually not. Uh, it's just the we're harboring our true feelings under it, and it's really kind of that middle acquiescence. So just something to be aware of, again, as we go through this process. So every year they look at the change, and they say, how is it that there's only like a 30 to 40% success rate for change initiatives? What is that? Why are we investing all this money and all this time? People are being trained as change agents, and yet we're not getting anything for it. Where's the value, right? The return on investment is absolutely atrocious. Um, so I think it's helpful to start. There's a great process called a pre-mortem. So post-mortem, obviously, everything has happened and you're kind of reconstructing it to go through it. Pre-mortem is actually determining how things could fail, right, along the way. And so this opportunity to really think about where the barriers are, where the challenges could be, what are those common resistance factors um, that we see? What could go wrong, and how can we prevent that, or how can we mitigate that? I also believe that, again, going back to the emotional piece of it, change often doesn't work because of the emotional side of things. There are uh, power, right? People want to protect what they have. Um, they fear that change, so there's that very emotional component to it, and obviously they want to be able to protect um, things. So again, as leaders, if we understand these and we start with the understanding of as we plan, we can build these concerns into our plan. And we'll get to a way to do this, but I think it's important to remember that, unfortunately, there's a lot of failure out here. Um, a lot of times we rush into things without doing planning or without pulling together really smart um, perspectives from all over who can help understand why something could not work. So let's look a little bit about the psychological reactions and how, again, that the emotions can cause issues and why people do to actually do resist change. And so there are kind of two variables here. Um, One has to do with how we perceive the change to be. So that's kind of the self-esteem on the left. So there's going to be very much like grief, right? The uh, Kubler-Ross, if you're familiar with that, how people respond to death and dying. Um, again, very, very similar, right? Uh, there's a denial that the change is going to happen. There's a denial that anything's wrong. That could turn into anger and confusion and depression, especially as the concepts of okay, well, this is actually going to happen. I don't know what I'm doing. Maybe this has been thrust upon me. Um, so I have to figure this out. And then I'm really trying to like actually figure it out and then kind of start working on it. And then of course it's a slow glide up to acceptance. And ultimately, from a leadership perspective, we want to be able to address these psychological factors because when we speak this, we have the ability to address these reactions and help people through it. By acknowledging it, we're not hiding it. We're able to really bring it into the open. It's that psychological safety piece that is constantly talked about, but is rarely acted upon. And so, these are normal reactions, right? They're natural responses. And so as leaders, the more we can really focus on these and use our messaging and communication to go through this, the better, right? And so we're able to break down that resistance, address that, increase people's self-esteem, right? Because that's ultimately what to do, and ideally, really shorten that time frame. So from denial to new confidence, if we can shorten that, so much the better. All right. And of course, if anybody has questions or wants to bring anything up, feel free to throw it in the chat. So let me ask you this. Go ahead and put this in the chat. Does it matter where change comes from in your organization? Does it make a difference where this happens? Who is who is doing this or who's putting this out there? I'll give you a minute to do that. And again, if you haven't gotten your pen and paper for our breakout, we'll do the breakouts here in a minute or two. And we got 31 people, so that'll be perfect for some small groups. Looking forward to it. All right. It helps if the staff buys in and helps with the planning and implementation. Yep, absolutely. Yeah, that's a huge piece. If it's originated from outside of those who do the work, there's a steeper climb for management. Yeah, I think that's right, Maria. I would argue that it does matter where change comes from. Think about it. If it starts with us, then we've already bought into it. Sometimes we have to get others to buy in, right? From a personal perspective, right? If it's coming from above us, we don't necessarily have the same leverage or access to have those discussions beforehand. Um, if it's coming from outside the organization versus inside the organization, right? Sometimes that matters. If it comes from peers, that could be both good and bad, right? There could be opportunities where peers are driving change because but that we don't agree with, or that we can support and get behind. So again, I think part of it is understanding where this change is coming from, being able to articulate and explain and repeat. We can't just say it once. The communication research says that we have to repeat ourselves at least 7 to 10 times in order for the message to really be driven home. And ideally, if we have multiple messengers who can bring the message, who have credibility with the group that they're talking to, um, right? If it's coming from a respiratory therapist supervisor to a group of respiratory therapists, that's a lot better than a service line administrator who has never had to deal with respiratory therapists, right? Um, or oncology, dealing with somebody from PT, right? So when we can think about how we join the message and the messenger, right? Uh, that helps a lot. And Juliana is absolutely right. Leadership and direction, right? Where does this come from? How are these leaders perceived? And what is that direction? What is that vision, right? Leadership is about vision and communication, communicating that vision and providing the tools and resources to be able to execute, perform that direction. So again, it's these are factors that come into play as we lead change or lead through change. And of course, we know that healthcare change is certainly unique. As an industry, we're very well attuned to the fact that there are risk aversion, we very high concern for patient safety and health. And if that doesn't align, that can be a barrier. Um, we certainly know historically that there's a hierarchy or perceived hierarchy based on role and status in the organization, whether you have an MD or an RN or any other types of titles. And again, this is going to be dependent on the organization itself, kind of who's involved. But there's a huge identity, right, linked to our professional status, not necessarily to the organization, right? So that's changed from 30, 40, 50 years ago, where it was, I work at X hospital, and you work there for your entire career. Well, now, well, I'm a RN and, maybe have worked at 4 or 5 different places or different roles, but I still identify as an RN. So again, as we're planning our changes, these factors should be considered, right? And we need to be able to assess them and see how they can be useful. One of the biggest challenges, I think, and this is in any organization, is that there could be this perception that staff and management are really having more transactional based interaction versus goal and performance oriented interaction, more substantive. So this conflict can really exacerbate change. And if there's a misalignment, that's going to be a major problem. So we want to be very clear about these factors and how, and again, addressing them. Because if you peel back these factors, they almost all link to an emotional element, right? A desire um, for some emotional benefit that essentially resists changing the status quo for someone. And that's ultimately what change can be perceived as is shaking up the status quo. And so that can be really important as we begin to do this planning. So here's where you want to make sure you have your pen and piece of paper ready, because we're going to do breakouts here in a minute. And what I want to do is explain one of the first tools that you can use. So let's say that you have been uh, you have to make a change, or the change is coming. And so what I want you to do is, in the middle of your paper, draw a circle or a square, um, put that issue in the center, and then you draw 2 columns. One on the left side is driving forces, so what supports the change, or kind of a plus. And then the second side, the second column, is restraining forces, or resisting or stopping the change, kind of a minus. And so that's how that looks. And so I'm going to show you, this is one that I've done. You don't need to read it, but basically the idea is I've listed all the driving forces here. This is the issue. And then this is going to be the restraining forces. Now I've color coded them for ease. Um, and then I've also gone through and um, kind of marked and evaluated which ones might be in which order, right? What are the ones that I really need to focus on? So there's kind of a brainstorming piece, and then there's an evaluation or a ranking part of this. You don't need to do the ranking piece. That's just an example for one that I've done. So what you're going to do, we're going to go to a quick breakout, probably about 7 minutes or so. You are a leader at Restful Waters Skilled Nursing Home, skilled nursing facility. Lots of issues about the existing health information system that they use. And so what your job or your role in this is going to be is to identify, evaluate, select, and implement a new system. So you need to kind of come up with something for this. So think about, prepare a force field diagram, right? 2 columns, one forces, and describe or list the forces that support the change, and one column that lists the forces that are going to resist change. And so what we're going to do is we're going to stop the recording here for a few minutes, and then, all right, well, hopefully that was a useful exercise for you. Uh, Again, we did it in very, very compressed time, but the idea here is that having a group of people going through this process, whether it's the force field, whether it's any of the other tools, um, or the processes that we've talked about, when we get a group of people together who can help shape this, what does this look like? What are the barriers? What are the concerns? Um, we can really start drilling down and work to then create a plan that is uh, something that we can all work with and work through for whatever the change is. So again, this would probably be in real life, at least an hour if we did it as a full day workshop. This part would be much longer. We would have, roundtable discussions and kind of debrief how this felt. But hopefully, it was a good experience. Hopefully, you were able to talk to your peers and be able to kind of come up with some ideas again as an example of how this would go in reality. So now that we've been able to kind of figure out what it means to go through that, let's talk about the types of change that we often see. So the first is that incremental, right? This is gradual change. This is the change that we all would prefer, probably. Um, And then we have the next piece is called transitional. So these are defined moves, a little bit faster, a little bit less, known per se, um, but we have a clear idea of where we're going. Um, Maybe the time frame is moved up here. Then we moved really to that transformational change, right, where we really are um, making pivots of exceptional types. And this is again very long term. Typically, think about the change that happened between the Industrial Revolution and the Information Age, right? Very transformational, period in about say between 1998, 1996 probably, and 2005, right? That time frame, kind of that 10 years, was very transformational because it really was, you know, just kind of throwing out the book of what was possible. And of course, we have very disruptive or very chaotic change. And I would argue that's a lot of what we live in now. Very fast, very uncertain. There's a lot of stuff happening, and it's happening very quickly, and it's happening without any necessarily balance or playbook or things like that. So when we talk about planning, it really helps to understand, you know, incremental or gradual change can be planned pretty well. Uh, the chaotic or disruptive is generally unplanned, and so we have to react more so uh, than we would be ordinarily used to. We still need a plan. We still need to respond appropriately, but it's a lot harder because the changes are coming so quickly. It's very challenging to get our bearings with a chaotic change, and so that represents its own challenge. Um, but hopefully, as leaders, we can really work through that. In the interest of time, we're gonna skip this quick quiz. You can see it in the materials. It's kind of a fun little exercise. But one of the things I really want to give you is John Kotter's 8 Steps. John Kotter was a business professor at Harvard Business School, did a lot of research, looked at a lot of different change, and came up with this idea that there are really 8 different steps. And again, creating some urgency behind it, talking about the problems, talking about why we're doing the change, assembling a group of people, right? That perspectives that we just talked about, having a vision, that vivid picture of the future. And again, I cannot say this enough. If you leave with nothing else today, the idea that this communication is so important, and communication is not just us talking as leaders, but us listening as leaders, and being able to identify where there may be challenges. So that's the first four. Then we have really empowering broad-based action, right? Especially at that kind of first line, second line management position. How do they make it happen? How do you get a sense of what the barriers are and how you can help remove those? Um, Generating short-term wins, giving people evidence that things are actually moving in the right direction. I'm talking about incentives. That then the idea is to continue to generate those small short-term wins into bigger wins and moving higher, building momentum. Um, One of the challenges here is that complacency or the kind of continued resistance to move from one level to another. And then anchoring the change within the culture of the organization. Um, and again, in a this would probably be multi-day of of a workshop. But I think it's important to kind of encapsulate that and understanding, right, that these are different phases. They don't go sequentially, right? You need to revisit all of them continuously and then reinforce them continuously. And so, right, understanding kind of where this goes and how it can work or not work, um, and having the discipline and having the longevity to be able to really go through all of the 8 phases. Um, right, steps is really a misnomer, but they're really phases, and so that's the idea is that you can use this and in the materials you will have um, the worksheet basically. Again, we're gonna skip through this. I really want to kind of have you understand, right, that effective change leadership really is about awareness and commitment, having a clear vision and a plan, making sure that the resources and support are there because that way it will be sustainable, right? So if we do all of these, we're in really, really good shape. And there are 4 questions that you as a leader need to answer. What is happening? Why is it happening? How it will affect me? And then what's the plan? And these are questions that you need to answer, but your first and second line supervisors absolutely need to be able to answer because these are the questions that their first line, their line staff are going to be asking them. If you as a CEO say, go to your first line managers and ask them these 4 questions and they can't answer them, that's on you. You have work to do to be able to make sure that those questions are being continuously reinforced and answered. So I will leave you with this case study that you can do on your own. Um, let's pretend you're the director of human resources at St. Sixtus Regional Medical Center. So it's a rural critical access hospital. And as director of human resources, you have 10 nurses, that you need to fill. And so you get this text message from your CEO, Dr. Hatcher. The board wants a plan to fill the vacancies. And, Dr. Hatcher is asking for it tomorrow, a draft tomorrow. Obviously, you don't like working that quickly on these things, but you realize that there's a lot of issues at stake. And so, um, thinking about with how you could do a recruiting campaign and a partnership with a community college, right? How could you answer the four questions, right? Ultimately, that's your draft, those four questions. So again, um, we would do this together in a lot more time. An hour is so short to talk about change, but hopefully the idea is that this has given you some ideas and some concrete tools to take back. Um, and go ahead and just type in the chat, which one you would like more of a deeper dive in, because that will also help us as we continue, to provide these educational opportunities for our ACHE members. Um, but hopefully the idea is that you'll be able to walk away with some valuable material. So stay tuned to your um, to your email for that. Be resilient. Um, there's a lot of resources out there. ACHE has some phenomenal ones. We are also going to link we're going to have a post survey, so you can give us some feedback so that we can make these better. And feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. Happy to chat. If you have any questions or suggestions, let me know. And so we're right at 1 o'clock, but I will stay on as long as people want to, if they want to chat. And really appreciate everybody's being here. And thank you so much.